Hello and welcome to A Fall from Grace. This is a newish visual novel. I say newish because I think it's been 91 days since it was released. So yeah. Um it's being made by Project New Moon. Um I think they're related to another visual novel that I did recently, and I forget which one it is. I do remember or recognize the name Grayson Wolf that you'll see right here on the bottom. And they have a server on Discord where they were talking about it along with some other visual novels. And again, I'm totally blanking on the name of the one that I'm trying to think of right now. I'm pretty sure one of you will at least recognize it or remember which one it is because I did mention it, I think. But yeah. Anyways, um, I don't know anything about it, so I'm going to into it blind. The only thing I know is that this is a coyote, and that's about it. um, Yeah, he's trying to like live beyond his means in a very small village, as you can see in the background, and that's it. That's all I know. I didn't really read the HIO page, so oh well. Anyways, so yeah, let's just begin and see what this story is about, okay? And checkmate, I win. It's not fair. You're so much better at this game than I am. Oh, Cedric, you can't be good at everything. Besides, you did fine today, a worthy effort indeed. That's easy for you to say. You've just won. Cedric folded his arms angrily as he turned to look the other way from where his friend Victor was seated. The two kids were resting in a shady spot in a large garden that stretched out behind Cedric's family home. The chess match had taken up much of the afternoon, and by now the sun was beginning to set, soaking everything in a beautiful orange light. The small lake, the various trees, garden follies, and statues had an almost magical look to them, as if they were friendly spirits gently watching over the two. Come on, you have many other talents. Such as? You're a great artist. I've seen your sketches. They're absolutely fantastic. The one you drew for my dad was amazing. You're just saying that. I'm serious. He's still got that hanging on the wall above his bed. There was a short pause as Cedric smiled at Victor's kind words. Thanks, I appreciate it, although I know my parents would not agree with you one bit. Your parents are wrong about a lot of things. Art's one of your great talents. Being pedantic is another. Oh, shut up. The two laughed as Cedric got up and stretched a little before gazing towards the setting sun. Your garden looks so beautiful today. Cedric was only half listening and turned to face the red fox a few seconds later. You know, it's not fair my family has all of this. When we're older, I'm going to make sure that you're given half of this property at least. Victor let out a slightly melancholy chuckle. Don't make promises you can't keep, you rascal. I mean it. You're my best friend, and I'd give you everything if I could. I'd love to see your family live in a home as lavish as mine. Well, I might be foolish, but I still believe in miracles. Victor got up, walking to where Cedric was standing, and gently held his friend's hand. Promise me you'll never leave, Vic. What? Promise me that you'll always be here with me no matter what. Where is this coming from? Of course I will. I know, I just need to hear you say it. Please, Vic. You have my word. I'll be by your side forever, Cedric. The sound of some distant fiddling reached their ears. The ball Cedric's family was hosting that evening had begun, and the chatter of the guests could also be heard coming from the house. I should be off now. My parents will want me to greet some of the guests. That's fine. My dad will probably need some help laying the tables and getting food out of the kitchen. See you tomorrow then? Victor smiles reassuringly as they started making their way back towards the house at a rapid pace. See you tomorrow. And with that, the fox was off, soon fading out of the view in the dimming light of the evening. Cedric! Cedric, listen to me! We're worried about you. You should be ashamed of yourself. Look at me! You're never to see him again as long as you live in this house. Is that clear? Have you no consideration for your own parents? How many times have we had talks like this? All for nothing. We hope that you would have heeded our advice by now. Cedric, you never listen to us. We've warned you time and time again, and we've had it. If you keep wasting your life away mingling amongst people like him, then we have no choice. As of now, you are no longer welcome in this home or as part of this family until you smarten up. Maybe we should have done this a long time ago, but perhaps the real world will knock some sense into you. Now get out! Cedric suddenly opened his eyes, startled by the loud noise he'd heard. He looked around worriedly, wondering where it might have come from. He then noticed a mug next to him and quickly realized that the noise he'd heard was actually just someone slamming it onto the table. Cedric! Hey, are you alright? Cedric jolted as he felt someone tugging at his right sleeve. For a moment he had been overcome by thoughts and memories he often did his best to not think about. He sat still for a while, staring numbly at the lion sitting beside him. Are you alright? The lion's tone became slightly more insistent as Cedric noticed how ridiculous he must have looked to everyone sitting nearby. I'm fine. Sorry, I went quiet for a bit there. I was just thinking of something. Whatever it is, can it not wait until tomorrow? Tonight is supposed to be a jolly occasion. Do try to not spoil it by being all moody. Cedric nodded. It was as if he'd been woken from a deep slumber, but everything was quickly becoming clear at once. He glanced around the tavern as he saw the innkeeper pass by. He looked over at the other tables, where folks were sitting, making merry with their meals and drinks. Cedric had only been in this tavern a few times in his life, and that had been many years ago, but still the atmosphere felt oddly familiar. Not exactly cozy, but quite laid back and cheerful. The lanterns hanging from the wooden beams, the old stone walls, as well as the wooden barrels above the counter all gave the place a rustic feel. He still felt slightly uneasy though, and a bit of envy got the best of him, as he gazed on the other patrons sitting at their tables and enjoying themselves. Finally, he set eyes on the familiar shape of his friend, Lysander. By now, the lion had gone back to chatting and drinking with the two friends he'd brought along for some company. Cedric was adamant about not wanting to spoil the mood and soon joined in the playful banter. I swear, if that bloke at the table on the far left has anything more to drink, he'll fall off his chair. He'll have some good company if you keep this up, Bill. Isn't that your 5th pint? From Bill, that counts as number 1. How are you doing, Cedric? You seemed a bit quiet just now. Oh, I'm fine. That is Cedric for you, always so glum at the worst possible time. Hey, I didn't decide to. You know what? Never mind. You still staying at Lysander's aunt's place? Since his parents kicked him out, yes. Cedric scowled as the others laughed. Ly helped me out. Luckily his aunt's a lovely old lady. It was the least that I could do considering the blame for the whole endeavor falls upon me. What do you mean? Well, you fellows know that I am not the best at saving money. Cedric is of a similar disposition, and his parents got tired of it. Oh, I see. You're lucky your folks are as rich as they are, Ly, or you might be in a comparable situation. No need to lecture me, Jack. Cedric is already good enough at that. Hey. If there was one thing Cedric didn't like about Lysander, it was the fact that he didn't know when to ease off the insults, even if it was all in good fun. But overall, he was a pleasant person to be around, and Cedric was very grateful to him for his assistance since he'd essentially become homeless. The last few months had been tough on him, but Lysander had been there to help him through thick and thin. Before he could lose himself to his thoughts again, he focused back on the conversation at hand, which had turned towards drinking games. This one in particular was a favorite amongst the group, giving each other dares that would normally be simple if they weren't also drunk. Cedric, your turn. Alright, Jack, run around the table 3 times. Sure. Jack was already beginning to slur his words slightly, all the more reason it would be funny to see him try to run around in a circle. Haha, that's way too tame, Cedric. Be nasty. Cedric simply cannot be nasty. It goes against his sweet and caring nature. Well, someone's in love. Jack was stumbling around the table and almost lost his balance after saying that, much to the amusement of everyone. Lysander, however, had seemed to got a bit more red in the face at the comment. Your turn, Bill. Very well, then... lie. Huh. I should have known you would have chosen me. What sort of Herculean task must I accomplish this time? If you like Cedric so much, I want to see you kiss him. Jack fell onto his chair upon completing his task. Ooh, that's a good one. The color seemed to suddenly leave Lysander's face as he sat there in shock. He had begun to collect himself quickly, however, and crossed his arms angrily. That's silly and immature. I'm not going to do it. Come on, Lie. Since when were you concerned about being mature? Shut up, Bill. I'm not doing this. Think of another one. Things were beginning to grow a little tense, and Cedric tried to alleviate the thickening atmosphere. It's alright, Lysander. It's just a game. It's disgusting, that's what it is. I'm a man, not some sort of silly girl you think you can make fun of. Not even a kiss on the cheek? That's perfectly acceptable. Be a good sport. At this point, Lysander's face had seemed to grow even hotter. Whether it was from embarrassment or anger, the boys couldn't tell. Fine. Lysander quickly leaned in and gave Cedric the lightest of kisses on the cheek. So light, in fact, that Cedric almost didn't feel the lion touch him at all. The others cheered and had a good laugh, while Lysander looked somewhat relieved but still very uneasy. Happy now, you perverts! Your turn, Lie. You've earned it. Lysander let out a sigh and allowed the familiar spark of mischief from earlier in the evening to return to his eyes. Very well. Jack, I want you to do the same thing to Bill. The rest of the evening seemed to fly by as the group passed the time joking, drinking, and enjoying themselves. The slightly tense moment had soon been forgotten about, and Lysander was at ease being his usual, boisterous self again. It was only when the innkeeper told them that he was closing that they finally got up from their table and clumsily made their way towards the door. The streets were quiet and deserted as the friends made their way home. Bill and Jack's homes were closest, while Lysander and Cedric had to go to the other side of town to reach theirs. It wasn't a very long walk, though, as the town was on the smaller side, bigger than any village close by, but nothing compared to the larger towns further east. They were walking through one of the wealthier neighborhoods, which had a few old homes scattered here and there, but consisted mostly of buildings that had been redecorated or entirely rebuilt in the last 100 years or so. Cedric often thought that was a bit of a shame, as the old Tudor houses had a certain charm the newer buildings were lacking entirely. The streets were also lit by rows of hanging lanterns, which the town had been gifted by some wealthy visitors many years before. Those were beloved by everyone, as they helped make the whole place look unique and even slightly oriental. More importantly, they had also helped keep the streets safer at night. We are going this way, you drunkards. The lion gestured towards the side street, as neither Bill nor Jack seemed to realize exactly where they were headed. In fact, they were all completely drunk and heading in the wrong direction, including the ever-confident Lysander. Oh yes, home is that way. Is it? The others chuckled as they took the side street. The dares were funny. You can't change my mind. Jack tried to say something, but the slurred sounds that came out of his mouth were not easy to interpret. You're quite fond of them, aren't you, Bill? They just get everyone to loosen up a bit, except a certain line I know. Oh, please. Of course I would have a hard time loosening up when asked to kiss one of my closest friends. I'm not a tail-raising pervert. It was just a joke, Lai. I'm not expecting you to marry Cedric. Just Cedric didn't get many dares. Yeah, we went easy on him tonight. The group's pace quickened a bit as they started walking down a slope. Without even noticing it, they had left the wealthier neighborhood behind them and had reached one of the poorest parts of the town. The streets were narrower, and the buildings were more run down. The rows of lanterns were also gone and had been replaced by a few irregular, solitary lights hanging from the sides of some of the houses. Overall, the atmosphere had felt much less safe than where they were walking a few minutes before. Hey, Cedric. Yes? What? I dare you. I dare you to go into that dark alley over there. Lysander pointed in the direction he meant and began to giggle slightly. And why should I do that? 'Cause it would be funny. Cedric gazed at the alley for a moment as his brain tried to decide what was the best thing to do. Alright, Mr. Comedian, I will. Cedric slowly made his way towards the alley, determined to prove something to his friend. What that something was hadn't made itself entirely clear, however, and he began to hesitate as he got closer. Come on, you can do it! Go on, you chicken! Something didn't seem right. Cedric came to a halt and glanced worriedly at his friends before finally stepping into the alley and out of sight. And if Cedric had turned back then and there, perhaps nothing might have happened that night. In fact, none of the friends would have encountered the masked figure who was waiting for them in the shadows. Lysander and the others stood still for a moment as they waited for Cedric to reappear. Hey Cedric, are you alright? Why isn't he coming back? I don't know. Where is he? A few seconds later, the coyote finally re-emerged from the darkness. The others were very relieved to see him. You gave us such a fright. But they soon noticed that there was someone else with them. And this someone else was holding a dagger to his throat. Your money, pretty boys, and nobody gets hurt. The group stopped in their tracks as the figure walked up to them. There was a short and awkward silence as they began looking around worriedly. None of them were sure what to do, let alone if this was real and not some drunken hallucination. I said your money, if you want your friend to make it home tonight. The bandit's tone became more like a growl. Cedric squirmed a bit as the blade began to press into his neck, his anxiety rising by the second. Please, guys, do as he says. Bill was the first to move, taking a step forward and fumbling with something in his pocket. Nice and easy, boy. Just like that. The moonlight reflected upon the metal that Bill drew from his pocket, illuminating not coins, but something with a handle. Let him go, you low-life bastard! In an attempt of drunken bravery, Bill grabbed his small pocket knife and rushed forward towards the aggressor. The bandit let out a sigh at this, shaking his head. They always had to make things difficult. As Bill got closer, the bandit sidestepped out of the way with Cedric. Unfortunately, he'd failed to take into account the drunken sway of the man. The pocket knife arc turned unexpectedly, slicing through Cedric's upper arm. The bandit released his grip and used his now free movement to grab Bill and swing him back towards the others, stumbling briefly before falling and rolling to their feet. Arrgh! Cedric fell to his knees, gripping his arm as he yelled in pain. Bill managed to get up and decide that making a run for it was now the best option. He was quickly followed by a stumbling Jack. Lysander stood there for a few more moments, as he looked around with sheer terror on his face. The bandit put his arm around Cedric and forced him up again, returning his dagger to the coyote's neck once more. Your money, or I'll slit your friend's throat. The line was off like the wind before the bandit even managed to finish his sentence. Lysander! Hey! Help me! Lysander turned to glance at his friend but showed no sign of wanting to slow down. The two shared one last look, their eyes filled with terror at the thought that this was the last time that they'd ever see each other. Lysander also had a look of regret about him as he abandoned his friend, knowing the bandit would certainly kill him. The line soon disappeared from view and was swallowed by the dark of the night. The bandit let go of Cedric, who fell onto the ground. He slowly paced up and down close to where Cedric was crouched, panting and clutching his arm as blood had started to pour out from the wound. He was feeling dizzier with each passing moment and everything was starting to grow dim. Well, that failed spectacularly. Fuck. The bandit threw one of his daggers to the ground in frustration and let out a long sigh. Then he turned to Cedric. At least I got one of you. Now, you be a good boy and keep quiet. He knelt down and reached for his victim's pockets, dagger still held close with precision towards his throat. There was a moment then, and the bandit froze as the moon appeared from behind the clouds, allowing him to get a better look at said victim. What the? Cedric? Is that you? But by now, Cedric was not able to answer as he felt his eyelids grow heavy, and everything around him quickly transitioned into pitch black. A pleasant smell filled Cedric's nose, grabbing his attention as soon as he opened his eyes. He seemed to be in an old building that looked like it had been decades since anyone called it a proper home. The sunlight shone through the broken windows and the large cracks that ran along the wall. By now, Cedric was fully awake and was starting to become worried as his mind began racing, the events of the night prior catching up with him. Where was he? Why did the bandit spare him that night before? How did he know who he was? He tried to move and was quickly reminded of the wound on his right arm as soon as he did. Ow! It was still quite painful. However, he immediately noticed that it had been tended to, and someone had carefully bandaged it up. He was lying on an old straw bed, and his back had been propped up against the wall. He caught a whiff of what smelled like boiled potatoes. Hey, is anybody here? What's going on? Whoa there. Everything okay? Don't panic. The bandit from the previous night walked into the room. He was no longer wearing his mask, and Cedric got a good look at his face for the first time. He was a fox about his own age, with a long, thin muzzle and flowing dark hair. Cedric couldn't believe his eyes and sat there in silence for a moment. Are... are you alright? Victor? Is that you? Cedric, it is you after all. The fox smiled gleefully as he put down a plate with a couple of boiled potatoes next to where Cedric was lying. It's nothing much, I'm afraid, but this is the food I had. I did manage to get some good bread the other day, but I finished it yesterday evening. Sorry. What are you doing here? I mean, where is here? Well, it's fairly simple. This is how I live these days, and this is where I stay when I'm in town. Yesterday evening, I decided that I would mug a couple of drunks, but that didn't go too well, as you know. And then I realized one of them, well, the one who ended up getting stabbed, was you. I'm sorry about that. It's okay. I'm just taking this all in. Of course, you'll need a moment to gather your thoughts. Cedric was quite dumbfounded. He could never have anticipated this. It was as if he was dreaming, and he almost felt like pinching himself to see if this was actually occurring. He thought it might be best to try and have some casual conversation for the sake of it, rather than just sitting there like an idiot. How are you doing? As well as can be, I guess. Just getting by any way I can. What? About you. How are you doing? Obviously not too well right now, but you know what I mean? Not bad, just living my usual and slightly boring life. This was followed by more silence, as Cedric quickly realized small talk wasn't gonna get them anywhere anytime soon. He glanced away from Victor for a moment as he gathered the courage to put what he was thinking into words. Victor, you've become a bandit? How did that happen? Victor remained quiet for what seemed like quite a while. That's a story I'd rather be telling your parents about than you. What do you mean? Are they directly responsible for... No, no, it's not like that. It's just... After they forced my family to leave the estate, we had no money at all. My father began looking for employment elsewhere, but it wasn't easy, so I resorted to stealing. It went well at first, but I should have known it wouldn't last. One day I was caught and they threw me in jail for 2 excruciating long years. During that time, my dad found a job, and once I was free again, I found out my family wanted nothing more to do with me. As such, I had to make my living this way. So yeah, I moved from town to town, but I've always stayed in and around this area for now. Cedric had often wondered what had happened to Victor, but actually hearing the whole story from the fox for the first time was quite a gut punch. He felt awful about it. Worse than that, he felt completely powerless, as he hadn't been able to do anything to help his friend when he needed him most. Victor, I had no idea. I hadn't seen you since the day my parents forced you to leave. I want you to know that I was always completely against it. You were my best friend. I still can't believe I am actually talking to you. It is a strange situation, isn't it? The fox smiled gently as he began eating his share of the potatoes. What must you have thought of me when you recognized me? A drunken idiot whose life is in shambles. I'm ashamed of myself. Oh, come on now. You've got nothing whatsoever to be ashamed of. You seem like exactly the same lovable idiot I used to know. The lovable idiot who always used to get you in trouble, you mean? Remember that time we stole all my father's wigs? How could I forget? That was your idea, you rascal. Yeah, and you went along with it. We weren't always up to no good, though. Sometimes I was busy beating you at chess. Hey, I won a fair amount of matches. Victor gazed at the coyote with an amused but skeptical look. Alright, more like 2, but I still won. What about art? Have you kept up with drawing? Cedric looked away, as if he were slightly embarrassed Victor had brought up the subject. I gave that up years ago now. That's a shame. You were seriously talented. The two kept chatting as they ate together. Cedric had almost forgotten just how close he and Victor were, and it didn't take long for either of them to feel comfortable talking about anything. Cedric couldn't help feeling a sense of shame throughout all of this. Victor had been through so much, yet here he was making the best with what he had. Cedric, on the other hand, he seemingly squandered away his life as well as his fortune, and was left with almost nothing. He needed to turn things around. He needed to fix his past mistakes, and he needed to get his act together. After talking for what became more than a few hours, Cedric was doing much better and felt ready to head home. He told Victor as much, and the fox nodded in agreement. Yeah, you should head back before anyone gets too worried. I might just have to ask you for one favor first, though. You're a great friend, and I trust you dearly, but I must make sure that no one can find this hideout, so. He hesitated for a moment, looking slightly embarrassed. I'm gonna have to blindfold you for a bit. Oh, I understand, of course. Just, I can't guarantee that I won't die while walking down those stairs. I'll make sure you don't meet a premature end, don't worry. A few minutes later, Cedric was standing in a narrow alley close by as Victor took off the cloth he'd wrapped around his friend's head. So, I guess it's goodbyes for now then. I think so. It's been quite unexpected, but absolutely lovely seeing you again, V, and I hope we'll see each other soon. I somehow doubt it, but hey, never say never. Goodbye, Victor. Take care. Cedric began walking away at a fairly uneven pace, as part of him desperately wished that he could stay there. You too? Victor gazed as his friend grew smaller and eventually turned a corner and disappeared from sight. You too. He almost muttered that to himself as he felt his heart sink at the thought of being separated from Cedric again after so many years spent apart. Cedric was walking at a fast pace as he thought about everything that had just happened. He felt reinvigorated after seeing Victor, and although he hadn't spoken of this to the fox, like he would be able to turn his life around and perhaps prove to everyone, including himself, that he wasn't completely useless. He was on his way to his parents' house. This was another spur-of-the-moment decision, but he felt like he needed to have a proper talk with them. However, as he kept walking, a few less optimistic thoughts started creeping in on him. How was he going to prove to his parents that he could turn things around? Would they even want to talk to him in the first place? He also began thinking back on that day many years before when Victor's family had been forced to leave his home. Cedric's father said that it was because it wasn't right for the son of a nobleman and the son of a servant to be as close friends as Cedric and Victor were. And they most certainly were the closest of friends, as there was a time when they'd spend most of their waking hours together. And as he kept walking, Cedric couldn't help but wonder if there was some other reason why his parents had been so worried about their friendship. Soon he reached the old building, whose imposing appearance grew more menacing with each step he took towards it. He reached the door and stood still for a moment. There was nobody around, and only the faint sound of a cart passing by in the distance broke the overbearing silence. There was a damp feel in the air as the sky grew more and more overcast. Okay, Cedric. It's now or never. All you've got to do is knock. Just knock. He automatically raised up his right arm, immediately remembering it was quite still sore. Ouch. Damn it. Cedric paused for a moment as he gathered his courage. Then the moment turned into a few minutes. And soon the few minutes became far too many. He slowly lowered his arm and began moving away from the door, looking utterly defeated. I knew it was going to go this way. What was I thinking? As if they'd take me in after everything that's happened. Cedric let out an aggressive sigh as he quickened his pace and walked in the direction of Lysander's aunt's house. As soon as he set foot inside, he was greeted by the familiar flowery perfume the entire house emanated. Aunt Jane was sitting in her chair having one of her many daily cups of tea. She didn't move, but clearly noticed Cedric's arrival. Is that you, dearie? Good afternoon, madam. Where have you been? I was starting to get worried. Cedric knew that she actually didn't really want to hear his reply to that, as the poor lady couldn't concentrate for very long, but he tried answering anyway. That's nice, dearie. Have you seen one of the blue china bowls that I use for soups? I'm sure one of the servants has nicked it. No. No, I haven't. He grumbled as he sat down in his usual chair and tilted his head up towards the ceiling. Margaret's stepsister's cousin's husband came to visit me yesterday. I genuinely have no idea who you're talking about. Cedric wasn't doing a good job of hiding his rising anger at the current situation he was in. He's lovely, and he gave me 2 beautiful candlesticks like the ones your grandfather used to own. Madam, I'm not your nephew, I'm his friend, Cedric, remember? Oh, of course, Cedric dear. For a moment, I thought Lysander was here with us. Speaking of Lysander, where is he? He told me that he was visiting his parents this morning. Did he mention me at any point? I can't recall, dear. Cedric snorted sarcastically at the thought of what kind of person would leave their friend in danger and not even bother to find out what had happened to them. Lysander was such an inconsiderate, egocentric prick, and the coyote began to wonder why on earth he was still friends with him. It was at that precise moment that the door swung open and the lion himself walked in. Is lunch ready? Haven't you already eaten, dear? I had lunch a few hours ago. Lysander was taking off his overcoat and hadn't even noticed Cedric. Well, I have not, so I would appreciate some food. All right, Lizzie. Aunt Jane got up from her chair and headed towards the kitchen. I told you not to call me. Cedric, what on earth happened to you? You're all dirty and bandaged up. Oh, that's a laugh. You asking me what happened after you left me at the mercy of an armed bandit. Well, what was I supposed to do? Run into your arms and get stabbed to death? Calling for help would have been nice. Cedric raised his voice as he started to get up from his chair. Look, I panicked, okay? I'm glad you came home safe. Well, you certainly didn't bother to find out if I was safe up to now. Shut up, Cedric. The whole world doesn't revolve around you. Nor you bastard. If you actually asked me how I was doing or what happened, I could tell you a really interesting story. But no, just Cedric overreacting as usual. Lysander didn't miss a beat, picking up on what Cedric had just said. What interesting story? Cedric paused as he stared furiously at the wooden floor, worried that he might have said too much. Come on, Cedric. I am curious after all. It probably would have been safer to not tell Lysander anything, but Cedric thought that it was best to be honest with him. That was a bit of an excuse, though, because in reality all he wanted was to be able to tell someone else about what had happened to him the night before. I'll keep it short as I don't feel like talking much right now. The bandit turned out to be someone that I used to know very well, an old friend of mine. What? It was no big deal. He was the son of one of the servants that used to work for my parents, and we were great childhood friends. You were friends with the son of a servant? My apologies, Cedric, but that is ridiculous. What could you possibly have in common with the likes of someone like that? Friendship doesn't distinguish between classes, Lie. We're all people, and you know that. That might be true, but there is a reason why the poor are poor, and we are not. It is their own inclination, for if they worked hard enough, they would be just like us. And you mingling with someone like that worries me a lot. You know what? Why don't we have this talk another time? I'm not in the mood for your stupid ideas. Alright then, Mr. I spent time with the common folk, but cannot spend more than 2 seconds with my friend. Have it your way. Lysander stomped off towards the kitchen, and Cedric sat back in his chair, staring at the ceiling once more. The more he thought about it, the more he realized just how much he actually disliked Lysander, and to hear the Lion talk about his greatest friend so dismissively certainly didn't help. Most of the day went by as Cedric kept to himself and his thoughts, mainly how much he found Lysander annoying and how he blamed him for getting him into his current situation. Cedric had never been good at saving money, and after he had met the Lion, the problem had only gotten worse, to the point that his parents had ended up forcing him to leave and hadn't sent him any money since. Now Cedric concluded that for some reason, he'd almost been hoping Lysander would be a good replacement for Victor, which was clearly not the case. Lysander was snobbish, petty, and selfish. Victor, on the other hand, still seemed just as kind and caring and sweet as he used to be years ago. Eventually, Cedric spent most of the evening thinking about the fox and just how much he'd like to see him again, to the point that he worried if he was becoming a bit of an obsession. But he knew he had to see Victor. Cedric spent the next few days searching the town streets, hoping to come across Victor by a miracle. He had no leads, and the fact that Victor moved from town to town and had spent most of his life in hiding certainly didn't help. He tried asking people about this masked bandit, but still nothing. Eventually, he met a wealthy lady who claimed that she had been mugged by what seemed to be Victor, as she was walking home one evening a few weeks before. Unfortunately, she had been so scared she couldn't really give any other details. He also spoke to some of the town guards, who told him that they had been searching for this criminal's hideout for months, yet hadn't gotten anywhere yet. Cedric kicked himself as he wished that he had paid more attention to where the old building was while he was there. The light was starting to fade as Cedric walked past the tavern. He hadn't been there since the evening he'd met Victor, but seeing as he had gotten nowhere yet, he figured that he might as well have a quick drink there. Perhaps he could ask the innkeeper if he knew or had heard anything about the bandit. As soon as he was inside, he noticed a large wanted poster stuck to the door while he was closing it, and the image fully matched Victor's masked appearance. Wanted, dead or alive, any person that catches this criminal shall receive great compensation from His Majesty the King. Cedric scoffed slightly, as if the king cared or even knew about some bandit in a small town. He walked up to the counter where the innkeeper was serving some beer to a few other customers. Once he'd finished, he turned towards Cedric. "Good evening, sir. What can I get you for?" "A large cider, please." He looked back at the poster as the innkeeper filled up his glass. "You recognize that criminal?" "Yes. I mean, it's complicated. I've been searching for him these last few days." "Oh, want to receive the great compensation that poster mentions? I wouldn't bother, as they don't specify the actual price." "Do you know anything about him? Or has anyone told you anything that might help me find him?" "I'm afraid I have to disappoint you. I've heard surprisingly little of him." He paused for a moment. "Although I heard a few clients of mine were ambushed after leaving this place mere days ago." "Yeah, I was one of them." "Oh really? I'm sorry I didn't recognize you." It's fine, don't worry. You want to get even with them? Cedric looked slightly confused for a moment. Oh, no. Well, not exactly. Quite alright, it's none of my business after all. The coyote had soon finished his pint, paid the innkeeper, and was out on the streets once more. It was dark now and the streets were quiet, much like the night when he had been walking home with Lysander and his friends. For a moment it felt like he was still wandering along the alleyways with them, and that none of the events that followed had actually taken place. As Cedric marched on, he turned a corner and thought at that precise moment he thought he caught a glimpse of something. No, someone. He was sure that he saw a figure on one of the rooftops that looked like Victor. It had to be him. But as soon as he noticed, it was gone. Everything was silent and still, just like it had been a few seconds before he saw the figure. It could have been anything, perhaps a large bird. Cedric sighed as he quickly concluded his mind was starting to play tricks on him, and that it was probably the best that he got home and had himself a good night's sleep. Then he felt a hand on his shoulder. "Hello there, pretty boy. I thought I recognized you." Cedric turned around excitedly. "Victor!" "Shh, keep it down." Victor clamped a hand over Cedric's mouth to quiet him. "You silly dog. I'm a wanted criminal, remember?" "Sorry, it's just, I've been looking for you. It was wonderful seeing you again, and I've been thinking about you a lot these last few days." Victor was excited and somewhat amused at the idea that his friend had been thinking about him so much, especially because he had been doing the exact same thing. Suddenly, he had become self-conscious of how close he and Cedric were standing to each other and how his body was pressed close to the coyote's. This was probably way too close for either of them, he thought. He quickly let go of him and took a few steps back, brushing his coat and gathering his composure. "Likewise, Cedric. Look, why don't we talk somewhere more private? I'm sure that we still have a lot to say to each other." "Of course." A short time later, they were back at Victor's hideout, and were sitting in the room Cedric was starting to become quite familiar with. Victor had lit a few candles, and the atmosphere was unexpectedly cozy. Cedric was on the old straw bed again, whilst the fox had pulled up the only chair in the room. "So, what was on your mind? Why were you looking for me?" "Well, the main reason is that I really wanted to see you again, but I also needed someone that I could talk to. Basically, I'm stuck. I'm in a bad situation with no one I can really count on, and seeing you just made me realize how much I've lost." Victor was silent for a moment, then scoffed. "How much you've lost?" "Cedric, I'm a wanted criminal having to spend my life in hiding, knowing my parents don't want to see me ever again, and that I most likely will never make it out of this mess I'm in. While you are the son of a nobleman that's just having a moment of crisis during his perfect life, with a steady income, a family he can return to, and friends he can rely on. Not to be rude, but I think you don't really understand the situation. My parents kicked me out of their house months ago. I have no money, and to avoid sleeping on the streets I've had to stay at my friend Lysander's aunt's house. Well, I thought he was my friend at least. In the last few days I've noticed that I don't really like him at all. Hell, he's one of the people responsible for my downfall, always inviting me to parties, balls, gambling houses, and so on. After all, he can spend all the money he wants. His family is the richest in the whole country. I couldn't afford this luxury, and I was a fool for thinking that there would be no consequences to my actions. And now I'm stuck, just like you. The only reason it doesn't look like it is because of my appearance and fancy clothing." That didn't feel like a very satisfying note to end on, but Cedric didn't really think of anything else to add, so he sat there in silence as he waited for Victor to say something. I... I'm sorry. I didn't mean to say that, and you're right. I had no idea what you'd been going through. I'll be honest with you, Cedric. I felt some resentment towards you the last few days. That was because I didn't know what had happened to you, and I just naively assumed your life was perfect. I understand. I was too embarrassed to tell you about it all the other day. Victor got up from his chair and slowly walked towards the door. He opened it, and Cedric got a glimpse of a small, winding staircase beyond it. "Follow me. I want to show you something." Cedric walked over to where he was standing, and the two made their way up the stairs. "Can I ask you something?" Anything you like. I was thinking back on the day you left. We both know the main reason why that happened, but I couldn't help wondering if there was some other reason my parents didn't tell me about. His train of thought was interrupted as soon as he reached the top of the staircase. Cedric was surprised to see a large window that led onto the roof of the building, and beyond it, a beautiful view of the whole moonlit town. He could now understand where they were, and it must have meant that Victor trusted him enough to know that he wasn't going to give away the location of his hideout. For a moment, Cedric felt very proud of himself. Wow, it really is something. Beautiful, isn't it? Yeah. The fox stepped onto the roof and beckoned at his friend to follow him. Come on, I'll show you where I spend my nights most of the time. Cedric followed him almost instinctively, even though he had no idea where they were headed. I'm sorry I forgot to answer what you were saying. The fox suddenly sounded a bit nervous. Yes. I think there might have been another reason. You know, we were very close. I think they might have feared that we were too close. That we were lovers. Cedric was taken completely by surprise. He'd never even entertained this thought. I suppose that makes sense? We were always together. Victor began walking again. Pretty much. The conversation grinded to a halt for what seemed like way more than a few seconds. The two walked on tiles and reached the rooftop of a nearby building. Victor sat down against one of the chimneys and Cedric did the same. So, what are you gonna do now? I mean, in the next few days. I have no idea. I was thinking about leaving this town for good. I'm tired of wandering around the same places all the time. I wanted to try heading east towards the bigger towns. Who knows, I might get lucky and be able to find some work there. Granted, I have to buy myself some new clothes and change my appearance as well as my name, but it would be more than worth it for a fresh start. For a moment, Cedric became worried that he wasn't going to see Victor ever again. Trying to suppress the bubbling panic, he gathered his thoughts and answered the fox somewhat jokingly. Maybe I could run away with you? It's not like I have many other options anyway. Victor looked at him and suddenly his eyes seemed to light up. Actually, that idea isn't half bad. You could come with me. I'd be happy to have a traveling companion. Uh, you mean it? Of course. Life's way more fun when you've got some company. I'd have someone to talk to besides myself, and, between the two of us, I've talked to him way too much anyway. He noticed Cedric was looking a bit uneasy and was likely conflicted about the whole matter. He leaned towards him and held his hand reassuringly. Look, think about it, and if you decide you're serious and you want to come with me, meet me on the outskirts of town tomorrow night. Tomorrow? Cedric asked, even though he had heard that the first time. I will. I need to think it through, but you have no idea how much I want to. The two spent another hour sitting there, quietly chatting and just enjoying each other's company and the beautiful view from the rooftops. It was moments like these, Cedric thought, that made life really worth living. Before the morning hours could begin, Victor found himself skulking through the darkened streets once more. He adjusted the mask on his face, careful to make sure that it was tightly secured in place. He didn't need any additional risks for this job. This would be the last one he needed in order to prepare for the journey ahead. Victor drifted a hand down to his belt, triple-checking to make sure that the empty sack tucked into them was secured. This was the usual gear he required for the days when mugging had gone badly, and he'd have to resort to stealing from the wealthier people's homes. He'd made a habit of not stealing from buildings in his hometown, but given this was his last day here, he reasoned that he'd make it a particularly memorable one. The people he'd be visiting today deserved it more than any of his past victims, which was quite a feat given the fact that he'd robbed many horrid individuals. One more time, just to be sure. Knife, dagger, rope, sack. That should be everything. He muttered this to himself as he checked it all again, making sure he hadn't left anything behind. Yes, well done, Victor. Keep up the good work, you handsome devil. There were hints of sarcasm in his tone as he spoke, remembering at times when he'd planned a heist nearly perfectly and broken into the home of a gentleman only to realize he'd left a sack behind. To be fair, that was one of the first ever attempts. Things are bound to go wrong when starting out. It didn't make it any less humiliating having to leave the house with nothing but some pockets of silverware, though. He turned a corner and found himself greeted by the familiar flickering of the hanging street lanterns. He quickened his pace as his destination drew closer. If my memory is correct, the wooden gate to the far right side of the house should be easy enough for me to jump. From there, I can sneak in through the wine cellar. They always leave a few windows open there to supposedly let it air out. Bloody fools. Once inside, I head upstairs to finish the job. He nodded along to himself, confirming every detail. What's more, there are no pets of any sort, likely due to their lack of interest in anything lesser than them, bastards. He quickly brushed off the emotions to avoid working himself up. An angered mind makes for sloppy work, after all. I should be able to pull this off with nary a peep nor an additional risk. If only every job were like this. The tension slowly started to build as Victor reached the large gate. However easy this particular heist was going to be, it still wasn't without its risks. He paused briefly as he was about to start his climb, studying the gate. Surely not. With a small push, the gate opened, unlocked like it had been those many years ago. They really think that they're safe from all harm. A small chuckle escaped his lips as he entered the courtyard, slinking across it until he reached the front of the building itself. He stood still for a few seconds as he gazed at the moonlit facade. The structure had once looked so imposing to the young fox, was now just another target of his desires. He smiled as an intense wave of satisfaction overcame him. You're going to pay for everything at last, you rich bastards. The next day seemed to go by excruciatingly slow, as all manner of thoughts raced through Cedric's mind while he paced up and down Lysander's aunt's home. Was he really going to leave everything behind? Then again, he didn't really have much to leave behind in the first place. Still, how did he know that he was going to get along with Victor? What if something bad happened to them? A bandit's life is not an easy one, and he felt that he was definitely not cut out for it. At the same time, you never knew what something's going to be like until you tried, and Cedric couldn't help picturing himself with Victor going on adventures together. Those weren't the only thoughts that crossed his mind, though. He thought back to what Victor had said about his parents possibly thinking the two of them might have been in a relationship. As much as Cedric tried to hide it, he really enjoyed that thought. He'd never been interested in women, and just imagined that he might be somewhat particular or fussy. But now he knew. He was attracted to men, and Victor was chief among them. It all made sense now. His teenage dreams about the fox, the closeness he felt to him, and of course the idea of wanting to run away with him. Along with the relief of finally realizing this about himself, however, came a less optimistic thought. Victor surely wouldn't feel the same way about him. He had been somewhat vague about the subject the previous night, and had dropped it very quickly, which obviously pointed to him being slightly uncomfortable with the idea. Was the whole thing going to be worth it? Cedric had started packing a few essential things into a straw bag, and now he turned to look at where he had laid it down. Maybe it would be better if he didn't get himself into trouble. If he dealt better with problems he was familiar with instead of looking for new ones. Yes, he concluded. He should probably unpack everything and give the whole thing up. Cedric, there you are! Cedric jumped slightly as Lysander's voice interrupted his train of thought. What are you doing? What is going on? Never mind, I'm still deciding if I want to go through with this or not. Lysander remained completely clueless. With what? The lion's insistent tone began to irritate Cedric, and the thought of actually leaving once and for all started to seem more ideal. Lie, why don't we sit down for a moment so that I can tell you everything? All right. Although I do not understand why you have to be so mysterious lately. They both sat down on the couch near one of the windows as Cedric started thinking how he was going to say all of this. But please, promise me you'll hear me out. Yes, yes, as you wish. Okay, so you know I met that friend of mine the other day? Who? The criminal? His name is Victor. Lysander rolled his eyes. All right. Victor. I went looking for him again, and yesterday evening I found him. What? Please let me finish, Lie. The lion folded his arms, grumpily. We talked for a long time, and I told him about the troubles that I've been having lately. Did he tell you to pick purses or something? Cedric paused as his anger began to grow. Sorry, do go on. He told me he's leaving the town this evening and heading elsewhere. And I think I might be going with him. You what? I mean it. You're mad. You're completely insane. Who in their right mind would think of such a thing? This isn't a novel, Cedric. This is real life. You can't just run away with someone and leave all of your troubles behind you. And with a criminal, no less. A low-life thug who you seemed bent on following no matter what. Have you thought about that? Well, here I am, right in front of you, the friend that has been trying to help you, whom you are ignoring completely. Helping me? Just how have you been helping me? By being your usual spoiled self, by giving me a place to stay and thinking that's going to just solve all of my problems, as if by magic? I wasn't going to say this, but now you've worked me up. I really don't like you, and I'll be glad to get away from you and your self-centered, snobbish ways once and for all. Cedric raised his voice more with each word. And I can't even fathom how much better life could have been if I had never met you in the first place. And maybe once I've left, you can find yourself some other young man you can manipulate just like you did with me. How dare you treat me this way? It's about time that I decided to live my life without your ever-present interfering, you selfish bastard. A moment of silence followed. Lysander probably hadn't been expecting something so direct. But why? Why what? Cedric had lowered his voice again, as he looked away from Lysander with his head in his hands. Why leave with him of all people? Because he is the only person that has honestly offered to help me out. Because he is my closest friend. And because I love him more than I can tell. What? So is this your honeymoon or something? The lion chuckled at his own joke as Cedric remained silent, trying his best to not get up and strangle him. We are very close, Lie. And I think I might still have some feelings for him. He'd done it now. Cedric immediately regretted saying so and quickly looked the other way. Feelings? Lysander seemed to be in complete shock. For a man? And a criminal, too? Cedric stood up and turned to pick up the sack. He was now grateful he hadn't unpacked. That's disgusting! Cedric, you're insane! Tell me it's not true! Oh, it's true all right. The coyote was starting to feel a sort of cathartic satisfaction as he saw Lysander squirming in his seat. He came to a halt in front of the couch the lion was still seated on. And don't pretend you're any better. I saw how nervous and uneasy you were during that kiss there we did at the tavern. It might have slipped past the others, but I noticed. I think you should be asking yourself a few questions before judging me so rapidly. You're insane! You could be living a proper life right here, but you've decided that you're going to up and leave everything. And why? 'Cause you have a feeling that you might like some common brute? Cedric ignored his comment as he now made his way to the door. How could you do this to me? Answer me! He reached the door and pushed it open. Fuck off, Lysander. All right then, Cedric. Enjoy your life of crime with your low-life boyfriend. But I'm warning you, should you or that scum ever raise a finger against me, there will be hell to pay. You are indebted to me, Cedric, and the moment that you forget that will be your last. I always collect what I'm owed, you useless, vomit-inducing tail-raiser. But the coyote was already outside and had slammed the door behind him, without bothering to listen to his former friend's rant. With a rapid pace he made his way towards the town's outskirts. He knew it was still too early, and that Victor wouldn't be there yet, but he didn't care. He just wanted to get away from everyone and everything, and this was his one chance to do so. Back inside, Lysander sat still for what seemed like an eternity as his mind was racing after what had happened with Cedric. Then he picked up a candlestick from the table and slammed it onto the floor out of a blind rage. Why? Why? How could you do this to me, Cedric? He groaned as he sat down again. After all I've done for you. Ugh, why do I care so fucking much? He ran his fingers through his hair as he gazed emptily before him. Why did he care? Cedric was just some rich idiot after all, but there was something about him, something that had always interested Lysander. The Lion had never been able to explain what it was or how it happened, but he had become very fond of the coyote. Too fond. What's wrong with me? The night when they had first come across Victor, Lysander had left Cedric at the bandit's mercy because he was worried for his own safety first and foremost. He had thought of Cedric incessantly since then, half hoping that he would be alright and half hoping that he would never come back so that the Lion could just forget about him. And the fact that he had been thinking so much about this angered him even more. Now he had just found out Cedric was gay and had feelings for someone else. It was a strange mix of emotions, relief at discovering Cedric's sexuality, anger at the fact that he had to consider he himself might also like men, but most of all, jealousy. Jealousy at the thought of Cedric running off with someone else, and with a common thief no less. You think you're doing the right thing, don't you, you fool? When you could still be here, leading a safer and better life with me. I would be so good to you. Lysander got up from where he was sitting, picking up his walking stick and marching towards the door, flinging it open and quickly running downstairs. His aunt's maid, Nancy, was the only other person in the building. She heard his footsteps and stepped out of the kitchen to see what all the commotion was about. Oh, Master Lysander, it's you. Is everything all right? Lysander came to a sudden halt as he fixed his gaze on her for a moment. Are you feeling ill? Many thoughts whizzed through his head, too many. He felt he couldn't keep it up, and it was all Cedric's fault. And now this common maid was inquiring stupidly as to how he felt. She had no idea what was going on, yet thought asking about it would somehow help. Lysander felt blind rage build up inside of him. Then he suddenly grabbed his stick with both hands and swung it at her direction, just narrowly missing her head with the bronze carving. She screamed and ran out the room, heading outside in the direction of the stables. Get back here and do as I say! Lysander fiercely followed, reaching the stables in a matter of seconds. He looked around, trying to find where she was hiding, as if he were a wild animal hunting for prey. A few seconds later, he had already forgotten about her, as something else caught his eye. He noticed his horse nearby and made his way to the spot where he'd left it. You'll be back, Cedric. You'll be back. And I'll be waiting. He mounted his steed and rode off at full tilt, quickly vanishing from sight, leaving only a cloud of dust behind him. Cedric had been sitting under a tree just outside the town for a few hours. He had seen no one pass by during the whole time, and had managed to have a good cry about the whole situation. After that, he'd soon felt better and was now quietly humming to himself as the sun sank beyond the horizon and the stars were starting to decorate the sky. As he finished humming, he heard some footsteps nearby. Hey, Cedric. Cedric smiled as he turned towards Victor. Oh, you're all right. Yeah, I'm fine. I packed some stuff I might need and had an argument with my former friend, Lysander. Was he the prick that you were telling me about? That's him. Well, as far as I can tell, it's good you're finally gotten him out of your life. So, are you sure about this? About coming with me? As sure as I can possibly be. You might not enjoy it very much, especially at first, and you might not be ready for much action yet, but that will come with time. I'll toughen you up and turn you into a real bandit, I promise. Cedric laughed. I'll do my best, Fee. That's my boy. My boy. He hugged Cedric, taking him completely by surprise. Your company means the world to me. I'm so happy we crossed paths again after all these years. I mean it. I'm happy to be here with you. The two remained still for a few seconds as they kept hugging. Then Victor let go and turned around to face the road nearby. I think we'd better be going. Follow me. The fox began walking down the road and Cedric walked alongside beside him. The excitement was high and both of them seemed to be looking forward to spending the next few days together. Yet Cedric allowed himself to fall behind for a moment to take a look back at his old home. He'd lived his whole life there, moments both happy and sad, exciting and terrifying. It was hard thinking about everything and everyone he'd leave behind. Was he really doing the right thing here? The longer he gazed upon the town, the more these doubts began to creep in. However, he began to realize that when he thought back to it all, the happiest moments he'd had were with Victor. When they reconnected that fateful night, it was the first time in as long as he could remember that he felt hopeful. Cedric turned back to Victor as he walked, and his doubts vanished, any fears fleeting from his mind at the sight of his old friend. If there was any chance at a life that would make him happy, it was with the fox. Quickly, the coyote caught up so that they could walk side by side. And soon the night landscape became quiet once again as the two friends' shapes faded out of sight, leaving the town they'd both lived in their whole lives behind at last. To be continued. An autosave has been created for you. Hello and thank you for reading this first build of Project New Moons, A Fall from Grace. This novel is written by and composed by and illustrated by project developer Alex, with Grayson as a main coder, music programmer, and story designer. This visual novel's entire plot, start to finish, was conceived on 2 voice calls between Grayson and myself back in around March. We have had so much fun designing a story that utilizes Alex's gorgeous way of setting places and characters, and Gray's ability to yes and an entire VM plot over only 2 voice calls. This has been a passion project that I have been so excited to be a part of and continue to be excited for the continuation of. A Fall from Grace represents more than just a visual novel, it's also the story of how Alex and I became best friends. Ever since the first meeting of, "Hey, I love your art" on Twitter. Then following this, the idea of A Fall from Grace came out very quickly after Grayson offered me a place on the Project New Moon team. A special thanks also to Mash, the chief editor, proofreader, and storyline aide for the project. Without the help of Mash, we would not be here able to release this build to you and now. And thank you to our relief coder, Kamek, for his hard work in salvaging Grayson's coding work into a visual novel that works from start to finish. Special thanks to Marcy of Eden's Reach for helping with certain elements of the coding as well as rendering the build for Android. As well as massive thanks to you for everyone in the Project New Moon Discord server and our amazing moderators Okami, Butter, and Raft, as well as Lost in the Memories developer and co-founder of Project New Moon, Cappy. I hope you enjoyed the OST written by Alex. We wanted to launch this visual novel with as much content as possible. No expenses were spared when Alex suggested a soundtrack based on English folk songs. If you did enjoy this visual novel, be sure to follow us both on Twitter using the icons on the main menu. We also have a link to our Discord server here too. Please join if you enjoyed this visual novel. We would love to see you in our Discord community. Also consider following Project New Moon on itch.io as well. We also have a link on the main menu to our Patreon if you would like early access to both A Fall from Grace, as well as our flagship visual novel, Lost in the Memories. Please consider a pledge there. We also post early access scripts, concept art, and character art on the Patreon too. So if you like what we're doing and want bonus content and early access, it's all there. Thank you all. Hope you enjoyed Project New Moon's A Fall from Grace. One Last Night. Oh, One Last Night, that's the one. Oh, also Eden's Reach. I wonder when Eden's Reach is going to be updated again, because it's been a long time. Also, I want to see another update for One Last Night. I actually like that one, and it ended on a cliffhanger. Anyway, so that was what is available of A Fall from Grace currently right now. And honestly, it's pretty interesting. It has that sort of Victorian era romance story to it. So I kind of feel like again that they're going to end up getting separated, because right here we see the main character with his lover's mask, but we don't see, the lover anywhere around here. So perhaps Lysander is going to warn the guards or something, or he's gonna get like ahead of them and end up going to the next city. He's gonna, tell them like, hey, the guy that's, that the king is looking for is this guy. Arrest him. So, like, what are your thoughts? What do you think is gonna happen? Did you like the story also? I mean, is it interesting for you guys? What am I correct in saying that it does have that Victorian era, or like not like one of those like romance novels that's like set in the Victorian era? That's what it kind of feels like, and not in a bad way, just in like in a like hmm. But yeah. Anyway, so yeah, write down in the comments, and obviously you heard that they do have a Twitter page where you can get like link to their itch.io page. My brain. But yeah, so thank you all for watching / listening. If you would like to play A Fall from Grace or get, any updates from Project New Moon stories, you can find a direct link to Grayson Wolf and Alex Sheppy down in the description. And if you would like to support the project and get early access and all that other stuff that I just read, you can subscribe to their Patreon. And they also have a Discord, so you can discuss the visual novel there. And yeah, all of that will be linked down in the description for you to click on, because you obviously can't click on this video. Actually, can I put links? I can put links on these videos. Anyways, so yeah, I guess that's it for now, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye bye.